Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. Um, I'm Chris White. I'm co-chair of the Nova Scotia Environmental Network's Board of Directors, have been for 3 years. I've actually never given a presentation on NSCN before, so I've made this presentation specifically for tonight. I've given lots of presentations at our annual general meetings, but those are generally to people who already know a lot about NSCN. I've never had to describe it to newcomers before. So this was actually a very useful exercise for me because I think I'm going to need to do this a lot more going forward, especially if I want to start talking to people in government and trying to get their support. So very grateful for the opportunity to make this presentation, and you'll be a good practice for me. So I've divided this up into a few categories. I'll start with my story. First of all, I have a lot of time to use tonight, so I may as well. And I think it's also good to start with a story, and I think it's actually important for the story of NSCN. And then I'll talk about what NSCN is, where it came from, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. So my story begins in 2008 when I moved to Nova Scotia. That was right after high school. I'm originally from Deer Lake in the west coast of Newfoundland, but I moved to Halifax to attend Dalhousie University to do a bachelor's of engineering, which took 5 years with the co-op program. So then 2013, I had my bachelor's of engineering in mechanical engineering and jumped right into a master's at Dalhousie after that. The opportunity was offered and I had no other plans. So that was another 2 years. And that was focused on battery research in the renewable energy storage lab at Dalhousie. So it's a lot of renewable energy modeling and also battery energy storage research. So we actually have batteries in a laboratory and we test them for different renewable energy applications because you need to store that renewable electricity in order to use it effectively. So by 2015, I had a master's, and some of the battery research we had done had some commercial value. So my professor and I decided to start our own company, which we called Charged Engineering, and worked on that for a couple of years. It didn't work out in the end for a variety of technical reasons that I won't get into here. But it opened up a new opportunity to pivot to a different research project. But in the middle there in 2017, something really significant happened. I really think of my life as before that and after that. And that was the Canada C3 expedition. So that's a few of our group there at a Arctic lake in Nunavut. So the Canada C3 expedition was a signature project for Canada 150. They sent a retired icebreaker around the 3 coasts of Canada from Toronto all the way up to the Atlantic Ocean through the Northwest Passage around Alaska and down to Victoria. And it was divided up into 15 sections, and any Canadian resident could apply to be on one of those 15 sections. So I got to go on an 8-day trip sailing around the coast of Nunavut with a group of really amazing people. I think there was about 25 of us, plus the crew. And we spent a lot of time exploring untouched landscapes and visiting Inuit communities. And it looked like we were having a lot of fun here, and we were, but a lot of the trip was actually having really heavy conversations and going and learning about communities and their struggles. And it was my first time learning about the real history of Canada. And it was transformative experience for sure. Met a lot of really, in particular, Indigenous women that really inspired me. And I had never volunteered before in my life and wanted to get more involved in my community when I got home. And within a month of coming back, I met a woman named Joanne Light at an event that I would never have typically gone to. And she told me about her organization, the Nova Scotia Environmental Network. And she said they were looking for board members, which I found really strange, that you would just offer a seat on your board of directors to someone off the street you just met. It didn't give me a great first impression, But it turns out that the organization was in dire straits at the time, and they needed to have more people on the board just to continue to exist. So I got a little bit involved with the organization. I wasn't super inspired with confidence that it was a great organization to be involved with at the time, but something kept me around. And by summer 2018, I was chair of the board. And we had a new team. We had about 5 or 6 people on the board that were mostly all new people. And we spent the last 3 years figuring out what NSCN is supposed to be and what we can do to make it something valuable for Nova Scotia. And around the same time that I became chair of the board, I started my PhD, which was the opportunity that opened up after my startup company not failed, but we decided to stop working on it for a while. We have a few patents that are still potentially valuable. So my PhD is working on second life batteries, and that means repurposing batteries from electric cars to give them a second life in renewable energy applications. So all those big containers around me there in my laboratory, those are batteries from electric cars. The one at the bottom of the picture is from a Nissan Leaf electric car. The one next to me is from a Tesla Model 3. And the gray one in the back is from a Chinese model. And we have a few other ones too. And we get these batteries from mostly wrecks where you can salvage the battery. And we test them to see if they would be useful in what we call a second life application. So if you're going to build a new wind farm, you're probably going to need some batteries. It's kind of a shame to throw these batteries away from electric cars and then mine materials in the global south and manufacture brand new batteries to do the same job that these could have done as used batteries. So it's all about reusing existing batteries. So it's sustainable energy storage, and it was a project that I could philosophically get on board with. So I decided to go for it. And I'm hoping to be done in 2023. NSCN has complicated things a bit because it takes up so much of my time now. So my life is a balance of NSCN, which is a completely volunteer role, by the way, and trying to get my PhD done. So what is NSCN? This is a question that I've only really been able to properly answer in the last 6 months, I think. And I think this image wraps it up nicely. So we see the environmental sector as a bunch of different entities that are not completely disconnected, but not as connected as they should be. We have lots of environmental nonprofits across Nova Scotia. We have the government that enacts policies that affect the environment. We have the public, and we have, as sort of a subset of the public, we have volunteers. So the mission of NSCN is basically to build connections around all these different groups for the benefit of everybody. It's all about networking. So environmental nonprofits would be organization or member organizations of NSCN. We offer an organization membership to environmental nonprofits, and DEN is one of those members. We also offer individual membership to members of the public, and that allows members of the public to get more involved in the work that we do. But we're primarily about serving environmental nonprofits. We also provide education to the public, and a lot of that comes from giving our member organizations opportunities to interact with the public through the webinars that were mentioned as we were talking earlier. So in the summer, we had a webinar with DEN, and that is broadcasted free to the public online, and it's recorded for anyone to see in the future. So it gives small nonprofits a chance to share their work and their mission with people in the public. And that's just one way that we do that. And for volunteers, we provide opportunities for them to work directly with us, but also with our member groups. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And for governments, we give opportunities for them to engage with environmental nonprofits. We once a year will bring members of our or representatives of our members to meet with government and ideally identify and foster opportunities for collaboration as well between governments and nonprofits. And as we're starting to kind of re-envision ourselves, we're also thinking we'd like to involve green businesses and indigenous organizations as well. They're all valuable parts of the environmental sector. I'm not exactly sure how that will work. We already have a few green businesses in our network, and we haven't historically had a lot of connections with indigenous organizations, but in the last few months we started to build some. So we're going to keep moving in that direction. I don't know if they'll have the same membership status as an environmental nonprofit like DEN, but there's different ways to involve them. An associate status would be one that we'll have to define. So yeah, it's all about identifying all these different parts of the environmental sector and finding ways to bring them together in ways that are meaningful and valuable for the environment in Nova Scotia. So we are a nonprofit society. We're not a registered charity yet. One thing we're looking into right now is what it would take to acquire charity status, which would open up lots of different revenue streams. We're nonpartisan, so we don't take stances on any political issues. We're sort of a neutral middle ground, so we can bring environmental nonprofits that do take a political stance to meet with government, and we're just sort of there facilitating that meeting and interaction. We're not actually taking stances ourselves. So it gives governments sort of a neutral player that they can rely on to make things happen in a fair way, sort of. And we're a membership-based organization. So most of our funding, our core funding, comes from the dues that our members pay. Organizations like DEN help fund us. So that funds our core operations and our growth. And you can think of us as a provincial umbrella. We're not really an organization out doing environmental work ourselves. We're just sort of branching out over everyone that is doing that work and trying to strengthen their work. So this is our current membership. There's 32 organizations. You can see DEN over on the left. And we have about 50 individuals that are members as well. And we're hoping to grow this significantly in the coming years. I think at our peak, it was much higher. And I'll talk a little bit more about that history in a moment. And one thing that we were historically known for is caucuses. So that's a way to help people network and collaborate together. So we have these individual members, we have organization members. And let's say, for example, that there's a few organizations that are all focused on, at least in part, on environmental education. And in our individual members, there's people that are also interested in environmental education. Maybe there's even some teachers in there. So they can all come together and form a caucus. And this is actually one of the caucuses that we have, the Education Caucus. They call themselves the Environmental and Sustainability Education Caucus. So a caucus is just a series of meetings, really, among like-minded organizations and individuals. And we help them come together and meet so that they can come up with new ideas. They can go off and do their own thing. Like this caucus in particular does a lot of great work in getting youth out into the environment and helping get environmental education into school curriculums. And our membership structure, these are the benefits that we've identified to being an NSCN member. So organizations and individuals can join caucuses and we'll help them do that. The featured webinars we offer to organizations and individuals as well, as long as it sounds like a good idea. Networking activities, so that could be having a meeting like this right now. It could be doing something in person, and that's what we're hoping to get back to doing in the next year or so. Online promotion, so we will promote anything that you're doing on our social media platforms. We have thousands of followers, and some smaller organizations may not have as many followers, so we provide a platform for them to get more visibility. We provide opportunities to meet with government for organizations. Like I mentioned, we bring representatives of organizations to meet with the Provincial Minister of Environment once a year. And the Volunteer Hub is something I'll talk about a little bit later, but basically it means that organizations can post volunteer opportunities through NSCN. And then organizations get voting rights at our annual general meeting, and they have a right to appoint someone to the board of directors. So a DEN appointed, or the Anglican Diocese appointed Tory Byrne as a board member of NSCN. So organizations pay between $40 and $150 a year, depending on their size. The smallest organizations pay the least. The biggest organizations pay the most. And individuals pay between 10 and 20. It's usually 20. I think it's $10 is offered for like a student rate. So where did NSCN come from? So we are a network, but we're also part of a network ourselves. So this goes back several decades, I think the 70s or 80s, when the Canadian Environmental Network was formed, and they are an umbrella group that connects together all their affiliate provincial networks. So you can see there's a bunch of networks here: Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. There used to be a network in every province. I'll explain why it's not that way anymore, but Environment Canada would provide something on the order of $1 million a year to the Canadian network, and they would distribute that money to the provincial networks based on their relative size. And apparently, like, I don't know the whole story here because I haven't been around that long. This goes back decades to before I was even born. But apparently this was a very effective system in its heyday. And I've been told by people that were around back then that it was people around the world marveled at how Canada had managed to leverage so much volunteer nonprofit capacity by funding this network of networks, if you will. So there's 30 years of history for NSCN itself. Started in 1991 when the Atlantic Environmental Network split into the New Brunswick and Nova Scotia Environmental Networks. So the Atlantic Network goes back quite a ways. I don't know the whole story of Atlantic Environmental Network. We're actually, one of our projects right now is trying to fill in this timeline as much as possible, because we don't know that much about NSCN's history, like within our current team, but there are a lot of people out there that do know this history. So one thing we're doing right now is doing interviews with some of those people and documenting what they know, and ideally turning it into a little bit of a documentary on NSCN's history, which will help us understand ourselves. It'll help new people that are learning about NSCN like you, and it'll help governments understand why they should fund it. So during those first 20 years, NSCN was getting funding from the Canadian Environmental Network that was coming through Environment Canada. I think it was something like $20,000 a year. And that helped pay for a part-time executive director. So you always had somebody that was running the show and getting paid to do it. And because they were there part-time, they were able to use some of their time to apply for grants to get more staff funding. So they had a few people working there full-time. And they peaked around 100 different member groups. So that's organizations, 100 organizations within its membership. There were 6, or I think even possibly more than 6 caucus groups. This is, again, details we're trying to figure out with these interviews, and lots of different projects. Like NSCN was very, very active. And in 2011, the federal government cut funding to the Canadian network. And that was under the Harper government. So all of a sudden there was no money that had previously been there. So all these provincial networks were trying to figure out what to do, how to get that funding replaced somehow. I think in Nova Scotia, we managed to get some provincial funding for a year or two. Some provincial networks just eventually shut down altogether. Others were very successful in finding alternative funding sources. New Brunswick Environmental Network is, I think, by far the most successful story. They've got a lot of provincial funding, and they're like a very well-known and well-respected organization in New Brunswick. But Nova Scotia was not so fortunate. So over the next 7 years, NSCN declined, and there were a lot of people working really hard to try and keep it afloat, but there's only so much that volunteers can do. So by 2018, or by 2017, I think it was when it really hit a minimum, there were 3 board members, no staff, down to 25 member groups, only 1 active caucus, and not really doing any projects anymore. And then in 2018, we had the new board, which I was chair of, and we've worked very hard the last 3 years to try and revitalize the organization because we really believe in its mission. And it hasn't been all easy, but we've had some good partnerships and some lucky breaks, and we're up to 8 board members. We have 3 full-time staff right now. They're 6-month positions, so they won't be there forever, but it's made a world of difference to have them there. We're back up to 32 member groups, and we're doing a membership drive right now to try and increase that number. We've just restarted 2 caucuses on water and climate change, and we've got several projects going on right now. So it's very busy, but there's still tons of potential to grow this organization further. So what are we doing right now? Since 2018, since I've been involved, our first success was getting a new website. I don't think I have any images of the old one, but it was not good. So we got a grant from HRM to build a new website, because if you don't really have a good brand and a decent thing for people to look at and visit you, then you're going to have a hard time growing. So this was a really important first step. We got a bunch of seasonal staff. We've had, I think last year we had 2 Canada Summer Jobs that were 8 weeks long. And that was the first time we've had staff in years. This year we had 3 more Canada Summer Jobs. And then we were super fortunate to get connected with a group called Sustainable Eastern Ontario. And they've leveraged some amazing funding opportunities for us. And that's how we managed to get 3 full-time staff. So we were just lucky enough that we had grown to the point where we had things for staff to do. But most of our success this fall is because of that funding we got from that group. So we're incredibly grateful to them. We've been doing the annual meetings with the minister. I think when I got involved, they hadn't done it for a couple of years. So that was a big step for us too, was to get those meetings back up and running. So we've done 3 in a row now. So last year it was over Zoom, of course. So that's Minister Gordon Wilson at the time in the bottom right, and then some of our member groups. You can see Marion there. And we still see a lot of potential to really increase the impact of these meetings. Apparently back 10 plus years ago, this would be like a full day session. We'd have all of our member groups coming together, having a big like conference style talk. The minister would come in and give a speech and listen to some of the talks, and then his staff would stay all day and really engage and like find out what issues people were most concerned with and what projects people were working on and how they could collaborate. And it was really impactful. So we're not back to that level yet, but we have a goal to work towards there. We're doing a webinar series. Last year, once we had full-time staff, we started doing these webinars where we would reach out to our member organizations and say, hey, we have a Zoom account and we have people that are able to organize a session and facilitate it. If you have a project you're working on or something you want to tell the public about, then we'll give you a platform to do it. So we've done probably a dozen or so by now, mostly with our member groups. And sometimes if there's like a really good idea for a talk, we'll invite a special guest speaker and use some of our money to pay them an honorarium for coming in. Like, I think last year we had Dr. Ingrid Waldron to give a talk on environmental racism. She's like a well known across the country for being an expert on that subject. So every once in a while we'll do something special like that. And this year we had multiple staff. We wanted to do something a bit bigger. So we organized eco evenings. So this was a 3-part webinar series that took place a couple of weeks ago. So on day 1, it was focused on environmental policy. We had Karen McKendry, who's very active in our network, Tina Northrup, who's with East Coast Environmental Law, another one of our members, Lisa Roberts, who is a former MLA and just barely lost in the federal election last month. And she's a supporter of our network as well. And so she came to, all 3 of them came to talk on environmental policy and environmental law. And then Sabrina was our first paid staff in years. She was our first Canada Summer Job last year. And she's gone on to do great things since then. And she did she was hired to do a report on green jobs for youth for the country. And she offered to come and give a talk on that, because green jobs for youth is also a very important part of sustainable transition. And then on day 3, we focused on Indigenous protected and conserved areas. So one of our recent members, ACAP, was connected to some of these groups in Cape Breton that were focused on Indigenous protected and conserved areas. So we had 3 experts come in and talk about that. And all 3 were excellent talks. They're all recorded on our Facebook and YouTube and on our website if you want to watch them. So yeah, that's one of our main objectives now, is to keep doing webinars like this for the purpose of public education on environmental topics. And yeah, we're very active online. It's one of our, usually we have 1 staff person dedicated to doing online communications. So it's a lot of social media and making newsletters to share news and events and job opportunities. And we've also had, I mentioned, 2 new caucuses this year, which is very important steps for us. We want to eventually get back up to 6 or 7 caucuses as the membership grows, because those caucuses do a lot of important work and governments will listen to them because they have a lot of really important people from across the province all coming together to take a common stance on something. Software has been a very important part of NSCN's revitalization. This is our new membership system, just a screenshot of it. So we can actually track all of our members and when their membership is due for renewal, and allows us to reach out to people very easily. It's really made some of our administrative work a lot easier by having everything kind of automated. Before, it was people who just didn't have time to comb through a bunch of lists and spreadsheets. And it's also allowed for us to have a login system now. So if you're a member of NSCN, you can actually log into our website and see your own profile and do lots of different things. So it makes it a bit more modernized, I guess. And then the volunteer hub I mentioned earlier. This is a pretty new idea. It's just been born in the last month. So we knew there were volunteer fairs happening at universities in Halifax. So we went to Dalhousie University this year. We printed off this banner, some brochures and business cards to try and, we were just thinking of getting some volunteers to join our team at the time. But lo and behold, we had 64 volunteers sign up on our sheet to get involved, because we had printed off, I don't know if you can really make it on the table there, but we printed off the logos of all of our members too, to just let them know that we also have, if you don't want to work for us, you might find that you want to do some work with one of these groups. And we got such a good response that we started thinking that we should try to make this happen, where we build a wide network of people that want to volunteer in the environmental sector. And we already have our network of environmental nonprofits. So if we can make a common platform where nonprofits can post volunteer opportunities and members of the public can view those opportunities and apply for them through NSCN, then on the one hand, you get lots of volunteers and particularly young people that want to gain experience in the environmental sector, both to do good and to gain experience for their careers. So it has that benefit. And at the same time, you're having all these nonprofits that probably need help that are going to suddenly be able to get that help from people they might not have been able to connect with otherwise. So that's a brand new idea that we're launching on Monday. So on our website now, we have this page. Individuals can register as a volunteer. Nonprofits can submit a volunteer position. And then we post it on our website. And this is what the hub will look like. So you can see DEN has one at the bottom there. There's like a long list of projects you can scroll through. So yeah, we're really excited about this, and it's going to start small. Like we have 22 projects on there right now, and maybe like 80 total volunteers that are subscribed to this. But over the coming years, we think there's a lot of potential to really grow this as we bring more organizations into our network, and as we reach out to more universities and colleges and high schools. You can build a pretty big network, and this could become really valuable for Nova Scotia. We're also, I mentioned the history project, where we're doing interviews with past leaders of NSCN to try and build a picture of our whole story, and hopefully get some like a fundraising or a trailer to submit to government that can show in 5 minutes what NSCN was, how powerful it was when it had funding, and how much we've been able to do with really very little funding, and what it could be in the future if government funds it again. And there's been all kinds of administrative tasks that I don't need to get into here, but it's definitely been not trivial to run a nonprofit, as I've learned. So where are we headed? Our future goals, just briefly, expand the network. We already have 30 member organizations. We want to expand that to 100 or more. We think it's very possible. There's well over 100 groups in Nova Scotia. We want to connect with green businesses and Mi'kmaq organizations as well, get more diverse perspectives and connect everybody together. We want to expand that volunteer hub, actually start reaching out to universities, colleges, and high schools across the province, and let them know what we're doing, and hopefully have a very large network of people that want to volunteer. Build more enhanced online tools. So we have the volunteer hub, but we could also have a job hub, an event hub, a petition hub. So organizations can submit anything related to the environmental sector, and it would all be in one central place for people to come look at. And we want to get annual in-person conferences. In the past, NSCN would have like a large conference once a year or every 2 years at least, over like an entire weekend, and invite hundreds of people. And we want to get back to doing that and build more government relationships. And ideally, go back to having a full-time or at least part-time executive director. So we're really thinking now about how to build a business case for why the government of Nova Scotia should fund NSCN with, even $10,000 or $20,000 a year to really make this happen, because it's a public asset. We're doing a lot of what we're doing for free, and the government should support it, I think. So thanks very much. If you want to get in touch with us, general inquiries are best sent to info@nsenvironmentalnetwork.com. That's the email that our staff check. If you want to talk to me directly for any reason, I'm at chair@nsenvironmentalnetwork.com. And yeah, happy to talk to anybody.
Thank you, Chris.